14 hours on my knees in the absolute silence of the blind sector. 40 centimeters of unstable earth separating my life from a 1984 Russian fragmentation mine that, according to the manuals, shouldn't even be there. On March 12th, while command sipped coffee in climate-controlled rooms, I felt the cold metal vibrating in my jawbone with every centimeter my probing rod advanced. You probably heard on the news back then that it was a high-tech surgical extraction. They sold the image of a clean war, monitored by omniscient satellites. But the truth is that the sensors fried in the first 5 minutes, and we were abandoned in the dark. Technology didn't save us. It betrayed us and threw us into a labyrinth of buried steel that no official map dared to record. I need you to listen to every word with absolute attention, because this truth almost cost me my life and the little sanity I have left. If you want to understand what really happens in the shadows, where protocols fail and men are left to turn into red mist, subscribe now and leave your comment. I am the Gravedigger, and what I am about to reveal to you now is the secret I tried to bury along with those mines until today. Sit closer, my son. The fire is already dying down, but the heat still reaches your hands. Take your time. Time is a generous master when we reach the end of the road. He lets us look back one last time before turning out the light. You know, the Bible says our body is like a tent, a temporary dwelling made of cloth that the wind tears and stakes that rust eats away. And my tent, well, its ropes have been loose for a while now. I spent my whole life thinking I was the master of the ground I walked on. Back then in the Army, they called me the Gravedigger, an ironic nickname for someone whose mission was precisely to ensure that no one ended up in a grave before their time. I was an expert, you see, engineering and tactical reconnaissance. My job was simple and terrible. I said where it was safe to step. I was the man who read the invisible, the master of what was hidden beneath the earth. But the truth, my dear, the truth is that pride is a much more dangerous soil than any minefield. I remember that day as if the smell were right here in the room, mixed with the smoke from the fireplace. We were in an exclusion zone on the northern border. The air inside the briefing room was heavy, thick with that metallic smell of ozone from overheated servers. The hum of the machines tried to drown out the tense silence of my team. I looked at the tactical tablet in my hand and saw that fluorescent green line cutting through what we called the blind sector. On the digital map, everything looked clean. A satellite-monitored corridor, a road paved by modern technology that promised omniscience. I was the senior specialist, the Gravedigger. The boys looked at me waiting for confirmation, and I felt the tremor, not in my hands, but in my soul. I knew the ground sensors were failing. I had seen the magnetic interference reports that morning. I knew that green line on the tablet was an electronic lie, a house of cards built by bureaucrats thousands of miles away. But the weight of hierarchy, the shine of imaginary metals, and that stupid fear of looking weak made me bite my tongue. I looked at those men, boys with photos of brides and children in their uniform pockets, and I said nothing. I just nodded. The path is clear, I said. And that lie weighed more than the ceramic plates of my vest. I adjusted my gear, feeling the dry snap of the Velcro. I picked up my probing rod, a piece of carbon fiber, cold and light, and felt the first warning of my own tent failing. A sudden tightness in my chest, a sting that didn't come from physical effort, but from a heart that could no longer bear to carry the secret. When we jumped from the armored vehicle and my feet touched the ground of the blind sector, reality hit me. The earth was too soft, a consistency of flour that seemed to want to swallow our boots. The horizon was a static gray, and the wind brought a taste of rust and ancient dust. The GPS on my wrist began to oscillate 3 meters, 5 meters to the side. We were walking in the dark, guided by an illusion that I helped maintain. And now, sitting here, I feel that same weight returning. The air seems to be getting thin, doesn't it? The sound of the fireplace is getting distant, as if someone were closing a door very slowly. My chest, It doesn't move with the same will anymore. It's funny how we fight to breathe our whole lives, and in the end, the body just wants to rest. I remember looking at the recruit in front of me in that field and feeling like time had stopped. And now, time has stopped again. The heat of the embers is gone. Your faces are becoming just a gentle shadow. I no longer feel the weight of the boots, nor the tremor of the carbon rod. I feel only an immense relief, as if the tent had finally fallen, and what is left of me, well, what is left of me is beginning to take the first step out. Everything is becoming so silent, so calm. I think it's time to see what lies beyond the blind sector. Funny, we spend our whole lives fearing this moment, don't we? The last breath, the closing of the curtain. But when it happened, oh my children, when the knot finally came undone, it wasn't a stumble in the dark. It was as if suddenly I had stopped carrying the world on my back. Do you remember what I said about the ceramic vest? Those heavy plates we use to protect our hearts from bullets? Well, imagine taking that weight off after 40 years. And not just the weight of the metal, but the weight of guilt, of unspoken words, of that green lie on the tactical tablet. All of that simply evaporated. I was no longer in that room near the fireplace. I no longer smelled the burning wood or felt the cold that insisted on coming through the cracks in the windows. The first thing that hit me was a lightness that we don't know here on Earth. You know when you dive into deep waters and for a second lose track of where north or south is? It was like that, but without the fear of drowning. I was like a feather in a wind of gentleness. The darkness, that gray mist that was covering your faces, it began to dissipate. But it wasn't like dawn in the desert, which arrives attacking the eyes and making us look for sunglasses. No, it was a smooth transition. The gray gave way to a glow that seemed to come from within all things. It was a clarity that cast no shadows. Do you understand that? In the blind sector where I worked, shadows were all we had. They hid death. But there was no place for anything to hide. And the sound, oh, the sound. I spent years listening to the hum of drones and the metallic snap of triggers. My ear was trained for the sound of threat, but what I heard upon crossing that veil wasn't music, but it sounded like a song. It was like the sound of many waters, a rushing river, but one that flows in perfect peace. A sound that vibrated in what was left of me, saying that the time of machines was over. The noise of the world, that constant exhaustion of trying to hear danger. Everything went silent before a harmony that I have no words to explain. I floated in that immensity of splendor. There was no more gravedigger. There was no more engineer. There was only a sun coming home. I looked down, or where I thought down was, and saw that the carbon fiber probing rod had been left behind. I no longer needed to pierce the ground to know if it was safe. Where I was, every inch was holy ground. Every step, if I was still taking steps, was a promise kept. The pain that squeezed my chest in the armchair, it was replaced by a new breath, air that didn't come from lungs but from the light itself that surrounded me. I felt clean, as if that old dust from the border, which stuck to my soul for decades, had been washed away by an invisible rain. I began to move towards the center of that glow. It was a silent invitation, a desire to run that I hadn't felt since I was a boy running through the pastures of the countryside. I was no longer afraid of stepping wrong. There were no mines, there were no traps. The omniscience that the generals promised with their satellites, I felt it now. But it wasn't cold. It was pure love. And it was at that moment, when I thought peace was already complete, that I realized. I was not alone in that vastness of light. I felt a presence. It wasn't a radar detecting me, nor an enemy lying in wait. It was something immense. Something that knew me by my true name, not by my war nickname. I felt a gaze that pierced through what remained of my pride and found the child I had hidden for so long. I stopped, or rather the light seemed to hold me with a tenderness that hurts because it is so sweet. I couldn't see the face yet, but I knew I was standing before something that made the whole blind sector look like child's play. My children. What I saw next, what I felt when that shadow of light approached, that was when I understood that my true mission was just beginning. I didn't need to open my eyes because there, my children, we don't see with the retina. We see with an open soul. I was floating in that sea of splendor that I tried to describe, but words are very weak crutches to carry the glory. Remember I spoke of that presence? It was no longer arriving. It was already in everything. It was as if the very air I no longer needed to breathe was made of solid love. A love that has weight, that has substance. And in the center of this clarity, I saw him. Don't try to imagine a face like mine, full of wrinkles and sun marks. What I saw was the source of all the light in the world. It was him, the great engineer, the commander of souls. But there was no uniform, no medals, none of that coldness of the generals who send others into the hole. What I felt coming from him was acceptance. You know that shame I carried from the border? That lie about the blind sector that I kept in the bottom of my chest like a grenade without a pin? In his presence, I couldn't hide anything. It was as if I were naked before a sun that doesn't burn, but illuminates even the darkest corners of our conscience. I felt small as a grain of sand from that desert. I waited for judgment. I waited for him to point his finger at my hands and say, "Gravedigger, you failed those boys." But what happened? Oh, my children. What happened was the miracle I didn't deserve. He didn't use words. There was no sound of a human voice. It was a knowledge, a certainty that blossomed inside me, as if he were touching my every thought with fingers of light. He showed me my own hands, those hands that trembled on the carbon rod, and I saw that they were clean. Not because I had never made a mistake, but because his love had washed away every stain of mud and guilt. I felt a forgiveness that made no sense. It was an unconditional love. Do you understand what that is? A love that asks for nothing in return, that asks no questions, that only wants you to rest. Every regret I ever had in life, every sleepless night thinking about the what-ifs, all of that was swept away by a wave of mercy. It was as if the blind sector had finally been illuminated by a satellite that never fails. And he showed me something, a revelation that changed everything I thought about the ground we walk on. He made me understand that no step on earth is in vain, that even the minefields of our lives have a purpose that we don't see from down here. I saw the boys from my team, saw each one's face, and felt that they too were under this same gaze. I felt that life is not about winning medals or following protocols, but about how much peace we can carry in the midst of war. I wanted to stay there. Oh, how I wanted to. I tried to merge into that presence. I wanted to be just a reflection of that glory forever. There was no more pain in my chest, no more exhaustion of 80 years. I was eternal. I was loved. But then the knowledge changed tone. It became soft but firm, like an order a father gives to a son who still has work to do in the garden. He didn't move his lips, but I heard in the center of my being, "Not yet, my little one. Your tent still has ropes to hold. Your time in the field has not yet expired." I felt a sweet sadness, a longing for something I was still living. I saw your faces, saw this room, saw the dying fire in the fireplace and the weight of my old body calling me back. I didn't want to go down, but his will was like a current that pulled me with tenderness to the shore of life. The glow began to fade, or rather, I began to move away from the sun. The lightness was being replaced by the weight of the boots, by the weight of the bones, and that infinite peace was being kept in a place that no ground sensor can detect. I was coming back, but I was no longer the gravedigger. I was someone who had seen the face of love, and the dark would never be the same for me. Oh, the weight. You can't imagine how gravity is a cruel hand when you've just known freedom. I felt a tug, a forced plunge, as if I were being pushed back into a lead armor, cold and too tight for my soul. The air, which up there was made of glory, down here suddenly became thick, dense, as if I were trying to breathe wet earth. The silence of that eternal music was cut by the shrill, cold beep of the machines. I opened my eyes, and it was no longer that healing golden light. They were fluorescent lamps, white and sterile, buzzing on the ceiling of a hospital room. I felt the sting of needles in my arms, the tube in my throat, the smell of antiseptic that tried to expel the perfume of eternity I still felt on my skin. The gravedigger was back in his torn cloth tent. I felt every scar, every pain in my joints, the exact weight of my 80 years falling on me like an avalanche of stones. The nurses ran. I heard shouts, calls for doctors, the sound of boots hitting the linoleum floor. They said it was a miracle, that my heart had decided to stop for almost 4 minutes and that suddenly it decided to beat again with a force they didn't understand. But I understood. I hadn't come back because of a medical error or because of the stubbornness of my heartbeats. I had been returned. Little by little, the hospital was left behind. But the minefield I called life, oh, that had changed forever. You know, my son, I spent decades carrying that carbon fiber rod, testing every inch of the ground for fear of blowing up. I lived on alert, suspicious of every shadow, a slave to those sensors I knew could fail. But after that glow, I could never be the gravedigger again. I left that man up there, submerged in the light. Today, when I walk through the garden, I no longer look where I step with despair. I no longer fear the blind sector. Why? Because I discovered that death is not a landmine waiting to destroy us. It is just a glass door, transparent and thin, that separates us from the embrace of someone who knows us by name. We spend so much energy trying to map the future, trying to ensure the ground is solid. But the truth is that the only firm ground is the love we leave along the way. I forgave those officers, you know, the ones who sent me to the border with broken equipment. I forgave myself for having stayed silent. In his presence, I saw that anger and guilt are burdens too heavy for such a short journey. We don't take medals to eternity. We take only the encounters, the hugs, and the peace we sowed in others' hearts. Look at me now. The fireplace is almost ash and the shadows are long on the wall. I am close to crossing that door again, and this time I feel that the ropes of my tent are ready to let go for good, and I am not afraid. There is no tremor in my wrist. Listen carefully to what this old man has to say before the light goes out. Do not live your life as if you were in a constant field of war. Do not let the fear of stepping wrong paralyze your walk. Love with urgency. Forgive with generosity. Do not keep secrets that weigh on the soul, because the soul was made to be light. Light is a feather in the wind of the spirit. The great engineer doesn't want you to be an expert in detecting dangers. He wants you to be an expert in trusting his path. The world may seem dark, your tactical tablet may fail, and the ground may seem uncertain, but there is a light that never goes out, and it is guiding your feet, even when you feel blind. Stay in peace, my son. The rest that awaits us is real, and it is more beautiful than any dream I can tell you. Now let me close my eyes for a little bit. I'm just going to rest my eyes and wait for the sun that has no end. Everything is fine. Everything is in perfect order. The path is finally clear.